Welcome to Annunciation Radio's Faith with Reasons, the program that examines what the church teaches and why. Faith with Reasons.
Well, good afternoon and welcome to Faith with Reasons. So glad you could join us on this Wednesday. This is a show 499 for us. It's hard to believe. We've been on the air since July of 2014. I'm Ron Finn along with Shayne Stanfield. How are you, Shayne?
Wonderful and blessed. Ron, how about yourself?
Yeah, it's wonderful. We got a nice day today. If you like the rain, so
just a little wet.
We'll take that. Yeah, why not? And it's a great day, as just about all of them are, to curl up with a good book. Unless, of course, if you are looking for humor or you're looking for something that comforts you, you might want to avoid the book that we're going to talk about today because it might just upset you, but it's also going to enlighten you as well. We're very pleased to have Noelle Mering on, and she is a prolific author and a mother of six, and she has written, a lot of things, but the book we're going to be talking about today is Awake, Not Woke, A Christian Response to the Cult of Progressive Ideology. And we first met Noelle at the Catholic Business Network breakfast not too long ago with Catholic Charities here in Northwest Ohio, and she gave a very compelling talk. And of course, we're all familiar with the woke movement. It confronts us in many different ways and has for quite a while. So I'm very anxious to talk about this topic and really encourage this book, which is available on 10 Books and also at Amazon. Also available, I think, on the website, so we'll get to that as well. But Noelle Mering is a fellow at Washington, D.C.-based think tank, the Ethics and Public Policy Center. She has authored many books, as I mentioned, and she is the author of Awake, Not Woke, and again from 10 Books or theologyofhome.com. Now, Noelle is an editor for the website Theology of Home, which is an excellent website, also a co-author of Theology of Home 1, 2, and 3. She writes on culture, politics, and religion, and she's published in National Review, The Federalist, The American Mind, Catholic World Report, and National Catholic Register, and her writing's been featured really everywhere: Fox News, Instapundit, EWTN, Real Clear Politics, New Advent, Big Pulpit, Catholic Herald, and Albert Mola's The Briefing. We just heard her just the other day on Teresa Tomio's Catholic Connection program. Noelle has a master's in philosophy and is a wife and mother of 6 children in Southern California. So, Noelle, welcome. Thank you for joining us on Faith with Reasons here on Annunciation Radio.
I'm so delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'll tell you, that was a wonderful speech that you gave to all of the gathered there at the Catholic Charities Catholic Business Network breakfast at the Pinnacle in Maumee. And the book not only explains what the woke movement is, but also where it began, and kind of you can see the trajectory of things. So I'm real anxious to kind of get at this, and again, everyone should really get their hands on this, because I think information is so key when it comes to this kind of thing. These are transformative dogmas that they're pushing in so many different areas in our life. So first of all, thank you for kind of deconstructing this and writing this very, very great book with really some clarity and even wit in there that makes it not only approachable and readable, but also just a good read all around. Tell us, how did you come about to take on this topic and do all this research, because there is a lot of research involved in it?
No, good question. I started writing about the woke movement around 2018 from various angles, sort of looking at it as a kind of a religious phenomenon, or parasitically trying to borrow moral capital from, a Christian culture to sort of infuse all of these ideology into us. And so I was looking at it from that perspective, looking at it the way that it's sort of destabilizing society broadly, from men and women to family life to, friendship amongst races. And now we're seeing, the fallout of the horrific gender ideology. So it just seemed like there was so much happening, but there was kind of a core connecting all of that. And so I just started writing essays about it. And then in early 2020, I proposed the idea to my editor at Tan Books, who we published Theology Poem with already. And he gave me a book deal, and then I started researching it, because as you said, there's a lot to research. And actually, I started at my father's house, who had quite a library, so I had plenty to work with there, and then found other books and things elsewhere. But and about 2 weeks into it, the quarantines began, and then that summer, of course, we saw the 2020 riots all over the country, and it was a really singular experience. It felt like writing a book about something that you're seeing play out so concretely, across the country, and so it lent a certain urgency, I think, to the project that really, I think, helped sustain my interest, or not my interest, but my motivation to kind of, this is something that is confusing and is happening and affecting so many people, and this is very timely, and we need to understand what's happening. And so I was really, really interested in trying to understand it for that reason in particular.
So, and the ideology obviously is very insipid, and as you point out in the book, at its core, it's an ideology of rupture. And it is on a collision course with Christianity, so we need to be aware of this.
That's right. Yeah, it's division and destruction. I really think that's the main effects of it. It divides people, and it divides us against ourselves, even our nature. It divides us against man, against God, and then it just that division really destroys everything. That nothing really flourishes amongst a constant spiral of division, and you even see it dividing amongst itself. You see the feminists against the transgender movement, and the breakdown that every group, once it's politicized, there's no real unity left to be had, and so the only way that power advances is by then turning against each other. And that's alarming, but it also is actually heartening, because you start to see people kind of their eyes opening as that's happening, because they feel betrayed, or, I think you're really seeing this with, for example, J.K. Rowling, who sees, the movement that she supported all her life of feminism now really so betrayed and left behind by the transgender movement. And Barry Weiss is another example of the free press, who's really seen, rise in anti-Semitism. And, I think a lot of these people thought that this was a movement that was supposed to empower their particular group. But I think that what we're seeing is that it really was never about that particular group. It was about the ideology. And what advances the ideology in the revolution is continual dividing. So, we're living in bizarre times, but it's also a good time for people to start gaining some newfound clarity.
So how broad is this woke movement? Because it seems to have infiltrated many different. It's taken on many different forms, and maybe you can begin by explaining really what this is, and then maybe after that we can start going into where all this has come from.
Yeah, no, I think what it is I heard a definition recently by an author named Eric Kaufman, a Canadian professor and author, and that I thought was succinct. He said it's the sacralizing or making sacred of historically marginalized identities along the lines of race, sex, gender. And I think that's helpful. I think of it as being a movement of atheism at its core, that seeks, to revolutionize society. That the idea of atheism becomes utopian almost inherently, because if there's nothing else beyond the material world, then we can apply sort of a social reengineering utopian lens to this world and try to perfect it. And how do you perfect it? You perfect it through revolution. And the revolution is fueled by two things: identity politics and an ever-devolving sexual revolution. And so I do think that those are the two kind of driving aspects of it. And the reason why they're so powerful is because they really appeal to very universal human temptations. Identity, we tend to sink into tribalism if we aren't course correcting with, the ways in which we are united just on a natural level, but also, a Christian understanding that these are that we are all made in the image and likeness of God, image of God, and we can see the dignity in other people in that way. And then, of course, the sexual revolution, it appeals to a whole host of human temptations, of licentiousness, and then the wounds that come out of that revolution, really play into creating more and more sort of foot soldiers, because it's easier to understand yourself as being defined by something evil, not a good God, if you know the depths of evil very personally and intimately. So this is a movement that's causing a whole host of pain, but also social pathologies that sort of exponentially multiply as they go on, unless, we really start to see through it, stop it, and have, I would say, a cultural and spiritual renewal, which is certainly possible. We know, and it is the will of God. So though it seems dark, I think there's a lot of hope, too, of course, that we should maintain.
So you've divided your book into essentially 4 parts, and of course multiple chapters in each part. But the first one is you're looking at the origins. So as far as this origin, when you describe initially the definition, the first thing that pops in my mind, it sounds like Marx.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the book, I kind of pinned the origin as the snake in the garden tempting the first humans, but when I do think it is, goes back to that fundamental evil of pride and the fall. Mm-hmm. But yes, in the book, I talk about more specifically about the history of Marx, who was, of course, influenced by Hegel, but also a group a frustrated Marxist that formed what came to be known as the Frankfurt School and matriculated to the United States in 1935, adjacent to Columbia University. And they were really influenced by Marx, but also by Freud. Mm-hmm. And the convergence of those two ideologies really kind of spurned sort of a new way to look at how to revolutionize the West. And they saw that, this is not just an economic movement. And of course, Marx was not just an economist. He had a real anthropology and a real understanding of, I would say, sort of a very perverted understanding of what a human being is. Mm-hmm. But the Frankfurt School guys understood, alongside with other influential people like Antonio Gramsci, that it just could not be fought on the level of class division, that we had to broaden the revolution into the culture by seeding sort of ideology into main sectors of institutions that control the levers of culture. So media, Hollywood, a couple of the guys went to really influence artists in Hollywood and sort of culture makers, artists, journalism, the courts, politics certainly, and very presciently the education system. So there's a lot of movement from, for example, what we know as being later revolutionaries in the 60s, like Bernardine Dorn, Bill Ayers, who were quite radical figures in the Weathermen and the Weather Underground, but then went on to take on cozy chairs and influential seats at teachers' colleges at places like University of Chicago. So I think they understood that it's a slow game, and that it will take generations. And the famous phrase, "the long march through the institutions," was really what they shifted towards. That this is not a revolution that's going to just happen in the streets and then the proletariat will rise up and topple the ruling class, but rather we need to change the way that culture thinks about everything. And so, I think they've been very effective in seeding the ideology into our imaginations, almost without us realizing what's happening. In fact, in most cases, not without realizing what's happening. So, oftentimes people will have a very kind of Marxist mindset about things, but they've never even read Karl Marx. They've just been, watching the last, top 10 Academy Award-winning movies and reading Cosmopolitan magazine and listening to, popular music. And that there's all sorts of ways that this ideology gets laced into what we consume in media. So I think it's been very effective. But the good news is that, because people haven't come to it deliberatively, there is the potential of helping to see, how toxic this is. It just takes a bit of an eye-opening. But I do think that's very possible. But yeah, the history of it is really, I think, through multiple channels. But I do think it was, documentedly movement into the institutions in a way that was both strategic and effective.
Absolutely. Our guest is Noelle Mering. We're talking about her book, Awake, Not Woke, A Christian Response to the Cult of Progressive Ideology, here on Faith with Reasons this afternoon. And that's, I think, my favorite part of the book is when you take a look at those origins and really find out where all this began. It didn't begin just, a year or two ago. This has been brewing for a long time. It's an ideology that's been a very deliberate thing and obviously very destructive. And as you say, you get it embedded into things, and then people just kind of assimilate into this, and suddenly you've got poisoned minds that are very vulnerable, and you kind of see the trajectory of it from the beginning. So as you get into this, obviously it didn't begin here in America. It began, in Europe, and then moved from there, basically through the education system. Is that right?
I think that was a very effective sort of delivery mechanism of the ideology, and here's an example. There's one of the Frankfurt School guys, Theodor Adorno. He came up in 47, something called the F scale, and it was to measure how much of a fascist you are, to measure how much of an authoritarian personality type you might have. And some of the metrics were: do you respect parental authority? Do you think that fatherhood is important? Things that are just very traditional, important cultural understandings of the importance of family life. Suddenly we're starting to see into our imaginations that actually leans you towards becoming a fascist. And so even things like that, as those things got popularized, those are very effective. There's sort of maybe the most influential ideologue that kind of affected college students in particular, and also sort of bohemian youngsters in the 60s was Herbert Marcuse. And he was really a celebrity intellectual at the time. So, he was at certain colleges, including in San Diego. But his influence was even beyond just his student body. He just became a celebrity and influenced people like Angela Davis, and through his many, very widely circulated essays, such as Eros and Civilization, Repressive Tolerance, One-Dimensional Man. But the education was, I think, the most key. So I think they realized, that we have to kind of get people who are malleable at a malleable place in their life, that their formation has not sort of calcified in any way or set them into any trajectory that is kind of resolute in support of traditional values, that they're more sort of open and experimental, and then start to feed this into their mind. So that was, of course, college students and people who were a bit more marginalized, bohemians, people who maybe had experienced sort of oppression, a real legitimate oppression, and could then be exploit that those sort of wounds and those sort of harms that had been done to them into making them into activists. So, you see the seeds of the racial division that was really exacerbated for the sake of turning the races against each other very effectively. So, they called this at the time consciousness raising, and they had this for women as well. Women would get together and talk about, the wounds that they've experienced at the hands of men, get each other really sort of energized to make change, to smash the patriarchy, to sort of topple all of the sexual normativity that they felt was just a social construct that was really existed to perpetuate the people in power. And so it's this continual effort to sort of rub raw the sores of discontent, as Saul Alinsky wrote, and then use that sort of frenzy of anger and kind of manufactured and exploited anger and rage into destruction, to destroy really all that is, to take down the structures, the systems of society, and most, I think, effectively, the faith and the family. And those were, the key targets of the revolution for good reason, because, family is one of the most stabilizing forces of society. And a movement of destabilization has to take down what stabilizes us. And there's nothing more stabilizing than the family. It also, it's a great way to transmit values from one generation to the next. You see a lineage, you have a history, you're rooted in your ancestry, your parents, your grandparents. You see this family history, and it also points you not just to the past, but to your future. It gives you a mission and a purpose, and it really anchors you in both ways so that you know what to do with the present. And I think the revolution really thrives on people who are unmoored from either history or from purpose, and then far more easily controlled when they are kind of adrift in that way.
So what are your second part of this? You've got 3 or 4 chapters here. Talks about the dogmas. This is very cultish. So there have to be rules as far as how this is brought forth in society. Maybe we can talk about a few of these.
Yeah, so I broke it down into 3 main dogmas. Now, the woke movement has not written these explicitly, but in analyzing and trying to tease out universal principles of the woke movement, these are the 3 things I came up with. Each is something that should be 2 things that should be held in harmony with one another, and in the movement, they are ruptured, so that one dominates the other. So the first one is the elevation of the group over the person, and you can see this in the collectivizing of political identities. So groups and persons should be in a proper community in harmony with one another. So you think about a healthy, ordered family life. The good, I'm a mother of 6. My good is also the good of my children. The good of my children is we take each other's goods on for our own, too. So I'm not threatened by a child flourishing, and nor should a brother be threatened by a sister flourishing, and what have you, that you want to the flourishing of the family. And in the ideology, the individual is really subjugated for the collective. So you can see this in many ways. One way I think I talk about in the book is, how pro-life women are not really considered women who can represent womanhood. So in the first Women's March in 2017, there were pro-life women who wanted to march alongside in the Women's March, and the organizers said they could not have any official affiliation. And the women were confused. They thought, is this an abortion march or a women's march? We're women, and we advocate for all these other ways in which women should advance, just not abortion. Mm-hmm. And what they didn't realize is that the movement has redefined what it is to be a human person. To be a woman is no longer to be, adult human female with reason and, made for men and women are made for one another and made to become mothers and fathers and what have you. Now to be a woman is to be fighting against the oppression that is the core of who you are. Oppression really becomes central to who you are. So you're defined not by good things, universal things, or the love of God, but rather by the hatred of society. And that hatred has to be something that in order to be an effective woman, a politicized woman, which is what all women should be according to the movement, you have to be fighting against the oppression. And the oppression is most deeply symbolized by our bodies and by our fertility. And so if you want sex to be meaningless, if you want women to be advanced, you have to get rid of, a baby, which is the most obvious sign that this interaction was deeply meaningful. It's so meaningful that a human being came out of it. And so you really have to kind of get rid of the evidence, and to put it coarsely. And so, I think that that's a good example of how, it's not about the individual in the marginalized group. The pro-life woman, it's not about fighting for her rights. It's about fighting for the politicized group and the revolution itself. So the person really kind of disappears in that metric. It's not about their flourishing. In fact, as I said at the beginning of this hour, those people can be easily discarded and quickly discarded once they've outserved their utility.
Yeah.
So that's the first dogma. The second one is the elevation of will over reason. So, I think we know when you're thinking about virtue, it's a matter of bringing your will into harmony with your reason, right? We identify what's good, and then we pursue it, and then we try to create our affections that we long for what is good, not long for the evil that our disordered natures tend to pull us towards. But in the movement, it really is an elevation of will over reason. That what I want is good, purely because I want it, and I choose it. The only kind of barrier to my will then becomes some consent. Is this consensual? And you see that bandied about so much, in the last 10 years or so, especially. It's a very paper thin kind of hinge to hang our morality on. And when you have all these people with untrained wills that are not disposed towards virtue, but rather, I mean, if you pursue just your will, you're going to be pulled into vice pretty easily. Then once those wills that are kind of unrestrained abut each other, eventually there's going to be domination, there's going to be violence. And the movement really seeks to correct that, use that violence, and point to the further need to double down on itself. So, for example, in the Me Too movement, you see, you've got these Harvey Weinstein-type people who have pursued a life of the elevation of their virtue, crowning their virtue as sort of their interior God. I mean, sorry, not their virtue, their will.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the violence and abuse is exposed, what do they say? Society says, "Oh, it looks like we just need more feminism. We don't need another. We need more isms. We need more power structures and ways to look at ourselves in this sort of disordered way." So it really kind of snowballs and creates kind of an avalanche as it brings down victims as it goes. So that's the second dogma: will over reason. And then the third one is power over authority. So even with that F scale that Adorno came up with, which you can see the beginnings of the Antifa, anti-fascist movement, which is sort of projection. It's a fascist movement claiming to fight fascism. But so in the power over authority, you see that authority really requires some sort of commission from above. That a person doesn't have authority simply by declaring it and or on his own. That if a policeman is given authority because he's been given a commission from something higher than him, or someone in the military, or a father. Bishop Shayne's got that great quote that beware of anyone who seeks to lead who has not first learned to obey. And I think that communicates something very powerful about authority, that it's about reverence. And the movement, because it's a materialist, atheistic, revolutionary movement, of reverence is the exact opposite of what it wants to foster in society. So there is nothing to revere, not even our human nature, certainly not God, not parents, not fathers. It is all just a fight for power. You have vying factions trying to out-dominate one another. So these three dogmas all together combined, I think, can sort of encapsulate what is happening in the movement, how it operates, and why it is as kind of chaotic and destructive as it obviously is.
Yes, and you can see throughout this book, you can really see where we're at kind of on this trajectory, no matter where you look here. We want to talk about the victimhood and really the crowd and the victim as we continue our conversation in just a couple of moments here after this short break. Faith with Reasons with Ron and Shayne. Noelle Mering is our guest, and we're going to continue our discussion about awake, not woke, in just a moment. Please stay tuned.
The effects of abortion are greater than most people realize. It isolates, hurts families, brings about fear, sadness, and grief. It does not need to separate you from God. If you or someone you know is hurting after an abortion, please reach out to Project Rachel at 419-260-5811 or by going to hopeafterabortion.org. Nothing is too great for God's mercy. Project Rachel is here to offer confidential help on your journey to healing.
Can a moral relativist object to God's goodness based on the problem of evil? The answer is no, at least when it comes to moral evil, and here's the reason. You see, moral relativism states no moral truths exist independently of the individual. That's to say, what is right and wrong is relative to what the individual determines. Now, how can a relativist's deviation from his own moral standard be considered morally evil when there's nothing to oblige him to follow his moral standard? The answer is, it can't. But if no moral evil can exist within the mental framework of moral relativism, well then obviously a relativist's complaint about the problem of moral evil is useless. So the relativist either has to give up the complaint about the problem of moral evil to keep relativism, or give up relativism to keep the complaint about the problem of moral evil. The relativist can't have both. I'm Carlo Broussard with a ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
Have you ever wondered about church teaching, what's happening in our Diocese of Toledo, how to respond to challenges to your faith? Bishop Daniel E. Thomas takes time each week to answer your questions on the Bishop's Corner, and he wants to hear from you. Submit your questions at artoledo.com, on our app, or email to bishop@annunciationradio.com. Include your name and parish or town and listen for his answer on the next show.
Now, back to Faith with Reasons here on Annunciation Radio.
Hey, welcome back here. Shayne Stanfield with Ron Finn, and today we're blessed to have Noelle Mering on with us to just discuss a wonderful book enlightening us to what's going on in our culture today. It's entitled Awake, Not Woke, and it's a Christian response to the cult of progressive ideology. Noelle's a fellow at the Washington, D.C. think tank and the Ethics in Public Policy Center. If I read that right. She's an editor for the website of Theology of Home and a co-author of Theology Home 1, 2, and 3. Noelle writes on culture, politics, and religion, and she's published in National Review, The Federalist, The American Mind, Catholic World Report, and National Catholic Register. She's also been featured on Fox News, Instapundit, EWTN, Real Clear Politics, New Advent, Big Pulpit, Catholic Herald, and Albert Mohler's The Briefing. She's got a master's in philosophy, and she's a wife and mother of 6, and lives in Southern California. Which I'm surprised they allowed you to work on this book in California. you were able to get away with that out there. But we were discussing the first half of the program. It basically got into the origins of wokeism. And of course, how this is how this is played out, what the rules of the game are, and I don't believe that we had a chance to conclude that. So I think we can pick it up there, and then maybe get into some of the things of the means of indoctrination, which is I think the third part of your book. And we have to, before we get into the show, we'll have to get in how we can pull out of this. I mean, there's got to be some hope here at the end of the tunnel. How we can restore this culture that's infected with this. So, Noelle, go ahead.
Yeah. So then, to finish up that second section of the dogmas, I have one chapter called "The Crowd and the Victim," and I do think that I talk about mobs. I think that the mob is sort of the spirit animal, if you will, of the woke movement. It's impersonal, it's unreasonable, and it's power hungry. But there's an interesting thing that happens, and you can really start to see like the deeper spiritual dynamics coming out in this. That the elevation and the power of the woke movement comes through identifying always as the victim. So the mob is really sort of oppressive and dominant. But it assumes the posture of the one that's oppressed, of the victim, and rather than sort of, I think, kind of trying to parasitically glom onto the real true victim in our faith, which is Jesus Christ, who's both victim and victor, and the only true victim of this world. That we are all beneficiaries of His mercy if we throw ourselves onto His mercy. Mm-hmm. And that really helps us. It brings us into a familial triumph with Him. But the way it operates is that it assumes the posture of the victim, and I think it does that in two ways. One is that it has to assume the posture of the accuser. So the only way you maintain a victim status is by having a constant line of perpetrators that you can point to. And again, you see the spiritual inversion here, that the faith and the church in her wisdom invites us to always look at ourselves, because God knows we have this tendency to deflect from blame. And so the movement that tells you can deflect from blame, in fact, you should deflect from blame, is really going to find a lot of takers to that proposition, because our sinful, there's a sinful part of us, a weak part of us that really is attracted to that. And the church says no, through the mea culpa, through, examination of conscience, through confession. You need to redirect your understanding to what you're responsible for and how you can own your own sins and repent of them. So this movement towards becoming the accuser helps us to kind of have a perceived, although false, sense of innocence about ourselves. I can become blameless if I can find enough people to expose as oppressing me. But the other way that I think it tries to glom onto and take on a sense of innocence and victimhood is by attacking real innocence in this world. So you see the innocence of women, for example, attacked deeply. through the sexual revolution. You see the innocence of children in a deeper, darker way attacked more and more. Now, that there's a reason why transgender story hours happen for small children and not at sort of elderly nursing homes, because children are a real target of this movement for a couple of reasons. One, because you capture them and destabilize children, then you drive a wedge between children and their parents, and you also capture the next generation. But the other thing is that I think that the innocence of the child really points to God himself, that when we are confronted by innocence, we start to feel shame about our sinful ways. It can inspire us to want to be better. It can point us to a true good and eventually an absolute good, which is God. It creates a standard and measure in our life. And it also points us towards reverence, that there's something that is really good. There's something we should aspire to. And so that's a real threat to the ideology. And so the innocence of children are not targeted by accident, but rather by design. And queer theory literature is rife with that instinct.
Yeah, no, it is. And who in the right mind would have thought it would be a good idea to have a drag queen reading to children in a library? And the jaw-dropping thing is to actually see obviously the parents bringing their children in for this sort of stuff. And I don't know if the parents. Well, there's obviously a disconnect there, but the parents themselves have been indoctrinated into this one way or another as well.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And I think that there's sort of a cloak of virtue that I think that they're assuming in becoming the parents that are braving this alternative life, and I think they're incentivized to sort of see that as a way that they can achieve a kind of and telegraph a certain enlightenment and a certain elitism. That they are not, subjected to the old kind of bourgeois values that their parents or grandparents sort of pushed upon them, but rather they are kind of pushing things forward. And that's the nature of progressivism, right? That if you don't want to be the last person falling behind as we progress forward, because we know that we judge our ancestors harshly for all of their foibles, according to woke ideology. So we don't want the next generation to be judging us similarly. And so it creates this sort of limitless spiral into the revolution to progress faster than the person next to you so that you can maintain that sort of status. And so I think that is playing into the psychology of these parents, particularly mothers. More often than not, it's mothers, which is interesting because it coincides with the disorder of Munchausen syndrome by proxy. I'm not saying these women necessarily have that. I'm just saying there's a reason why in that syndrome where a caregiver kind of causes and invents illness in the person in her care is most of the time, vastly most of the time, the mother. So that's another just kind of interesting thing to point out.
It's very interesting, and of course, the woke movement targets the father and of course God, and then I think everybody doesn't want to feel like they're indoctrinated, right? So the sin of pride enters into this and tells people, well, I came to this all of these views on my own, when you don't even recognize the fact that you've been poisoned, right?
That's exactly right. I think, and we can see this. I mean, this is universal human temptation. We see it all the time, and in our politics and culture today, that we're so disdainful of the people who disagree with us, the people on the other side of the aisle, or that group over there. We really disdain them, and to the point where we're more addicted to the pleasure of feeling sort of that disdain and that superiority than we are even to the human openness to seeing that we might be in error or longing to arrive at the truth. I'm so attached to my political hatreds, for example, that I hope I'm not, but I'm saying hypothetically, we become so attached to our political hatreds that it trumps even our lion eyes and our lion mind and our ability to think very reasonably and objectively. So there's a real psychological power that has over us, I think.
And so there's an element, and you hear this term brought up quite a bit, virtue signaling. A lot of people think that they're doing something virtuous, so they jump on board as if they're this is a positive movement. But reason had been ejected long ago in many of these movements. It's quite clear if you're awake and you see what's going on with open eyes.
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting because, virtue becomes not about our habits of life, but about our adopting the right political positions.
Yes.
Which becomes every position, right? Because everything is politics according to the movement. Everything's collapsed into the political. Even your family life, your neighbor's barbecue, your marriage, everything is supposed to become politicized. And so our virtue lies in being on the right side of everything. And so it's kind of propositional virtue, abstracted virtue. It's disembodied, which is consistent with other aspects of the movement.
So this began, for the most part, in the sexual revolution.
Well, I think the sexual revolution has been hugely, an origin factor, but also hugely converting for people into the woke movement. I think about it in this way, that the movement is really destroys the person and the family by redefining each member of the family into opposition from himself. So men become soft, women become hard, and children are unprotected. So men becoming soft, St. Thomas Aquinas defines effeminacy as the inability to endure what is arduous for the sake of what is good. In other words, to be manly is not to have machismo or to have power or to be a weightlifter or a football player or something. It's to be virtuous. It's to be ultimately a holy man. This is what makes you very manly and masculine. And insofar as the sexual revolution really strips men and everyone of that kind of formation in virtue, men become very soft. They become utterly unmanly, because they're slaves to their appetites, they're addicted to their carnal pleasures. So men have become very emasculated, as a result of the sexual revolution. Obviously, not all men, but the men who succumb to it. And then what happens to women? In a way, the exact opposite. Women become very hardened. So you can think of it as when your body has a wound, it creates a callus around it. And I think that's really happened to women, that, our natures are really vulnerable and valuable, and far too vulnerable and valuable to endure the traumas of the sexual revolution. Women being abused, given an incentive to kill their own children, all of used and abused over and over again, and willingly. I'm not saying that they're not culpable victims. They're oftentimes walking into this with poor judgment. But that really effectively hardens them, because we're supposed to be cared for, and I think we sense that we're not supposed to, we're supposed to become mothers. We're not supposed to kill our children. We're supposed to be mothers either spiritually or biologically, as are men supposed to be fathers, spiritually or biologically. And so you see a lot of very hardened women now, and at any pro-life or pro-choice rally, when you see the pro-abortion movement, you really see deep anger, and also probably behind that deep pain, and deep shame. So I think that's really redefined women into what the opposite of what they should be. We should be receptive, soft, supple to relationships and to the people that are in our care. It's a beautiful superpower of women. As should men be strong and protective, a beautiful superpower of men. And then, what happens to children is just as we were talking about earlier, they are the moral shepherds who are supposed to guide them in life are compromised and have no real moral authority anymore. So they are left deeply unprotected, being taken to see basically strip shows of men, dancing around in women's clothing and things like that. So, or left to their own devices, not shepherded into virtue, not formed, but left alone with technological devices that introduce them into a life of disembodied kind of unreality and really despair. So it's really deeply harmful, obviously, to each member of the family and to the family as a whole, and then to our communities and society at large.
So we are discussing, for the most part, how we've been indoctrinated over time, and we discussed during the first half, obviously, how this has infiltrated our educational system. So we know how our children are being effectively brainwashed. Perhaps just over the last couple of generations. It's hard to really fathom that it's a relatively short period of time, but here we are, and there's so many people that have been changed. But as you were talking, the one thing that you talk about in the book is your thought and speech control. And the one thing that was going through my mind was there's been a lot of talk recently on how, you have these children, when you have Disney and you have some of these other large media corporations that are putting out shows that are being gobbled up by our children. And when you talk about men that have been emasculated, you've got shows out there that there's no father, or their father is portrayed as a goof. And this is what's going through my mind, and it's quite obvious it's been going on for quite some time.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, I think the targeting of fatherhood, fathers are portrayed as either a punchline or something sinister and malevolent.
Yeah.
Because I think fatherhood is so powerful. I mean, there's a reason why every revolutionary from Marx to Mao to Marcuse targeted fatherhood. Because you have to take out the shepherd if you want access to the sheep, and insofar as they want to access the children into that innocence, fathers have to be taken out first, either by emasculating them and make them ineffective, or by making fatherhood itself not something that is a powerful, manly adventure or mission in life. That it's sort of something we can shrug off. We don't need it. Women don't need a man. And that I talk to young men sometimes now who don't see that it's a beautiful thing to aspire to become a father one day. It just sort of seems like, well, why would I want to be that? It's either something that hurt me or that I see portrayed as malevolent, or I think it's sort of a joke. And I'm a materialist now. I want to make money, and that's my big priority now. Why do I want to give myself to people that I will then have to support, and that will cost me money? And it's really deeply sad. I think those conversations can be important because it doesn't really take that much to kind of reframe that conversation in young men. So I think that's really important. But yeah, thought and speech control, that chapter is certainly connected to all of this, that insofar as we stop identifying, what is good because we no longer are striving after virtue, we really start to suppress our own ability to think rationally, that there's a real connection between moral breakdown and intellectual breakdown, I think. And certainly then, of course, we have, what's happening all over, which is, people self-censoring themselves because they see and are given kind of models of hung up on, a metaphorical stake that of people who have transgressed, speech, politically correct speech. So that leads to a lot of self-censoring, which leads to censoring of our own thought, because it's really hard to live with the cognitive dissonance that something could be true, but you have to project that something that is false as though it were true. And so we start to almost lie to ourselves because we don't want to admit that we're lying outwardly. So we start to lie inwardly. People
don't want to be canceled. They don't want to. They don't want to take that hit on their social media circles, and that that's very costly, particularly if it's somebody that's very well known. They don't want to sacrifice their career or potentially harm their career by saying the wrong thing. So we've got just a little less than 10 minutes left in the program, and I do want to spend the rest of the time looking at restoration. What is the hope for culture at this point? Regarding the person, the family. You've addressed all of these in your book, and of course the city of God.
Yeah, no, I mean, I do actually, despite all we've talked about so far, have a great deal of hope. For one thing, no ideology can extinguish our deep longings that's inherent in every human being. Longings for love, longings for stability, longings for God, first and foremost. That I think that every person wants that, and so the ideology can kind of try to suppress those longings by igniting our vices and dividing us and igniting our hatreds, but it can't fully extinguish it. And so I think people want a positive vision of how to live, and the movement can't give that. It can only point out things that are wrong. It can only tear things down. It's not creative. Evil is never creative. It's never fruitful. It can't build anything. And so, as Catholics in particular, I think that we have, the greatest vision of a human life that anyone can fathom. And so you see it in our cathedrals, you see it in our art, you see it in the Mass, you see it in people who are living a happy, ordered family life. There's something there that is undeniably good and beautiful and aspirational. And so I think we need to first and foremost have real confidence in that reality, that we have the vision on offer that no ideology can ever compete with. And so once we have that confidence, I think that gives us courage to speak out, courage to understand that, that this is a manipulation that is trying to make us self-censor, and that it is broken down by exposing it. Once someone starts saying things that you're not supposed to say, then the person next to them feels emboldened to say things you're not supposed to say, that there really is a contagion in a positive way that can happen. And, that we don't have to be afraid of sort of the manipulations of a kind of a bullying effort of trying to maintain the coercion of lies, that we can actually point instead to the freedom inherent in pursuing and saying true things. So I think that positive vision can give us that confidence to be courageous. And I think that we have to do things in similar ways that the movement has done it. So the woke movement achieved power by through popular narratives and storytelling. It also achieved power through waking up people's consciousness in one-on-one relationships and through social settings. So we should be doing the exact same thing. We should be putting out positive examples of embodied and happy and ordered life. I think we have more and more movies and television shows coming out that are either explicitly religious or more accurately reflect the truth of the human person. But this is part of the motivation between Theology of Home, is that we have these beautiful books with images, photography. They're like coffee table books, but they're showing men who are competent fathers, women who are pregnant and have children, religious sisters, priests, families getting together to be social and live in community in a way that's pulls you in. I think alongside of those images, we have meditations on what this means, what this looks like, the struggles, not having Pollyanna-ish view of it, but why the struggles are worth struggling with, and why they're worth, these are things worth contending with, because there is this beauty on offer in the simple and ordinary life of the Christian. So, I think putting forward those sort of images and storytelling is really, really very important. But on a one-on-one level, I think we have to have a couple of things: hospitality and mentorship. I think we need to be using our homes not just to protect us from the outside world, but, both literally and metaphorically, bringing the world into our homes, welcoming neighbors, welcoming sort of younger people, welcoming people who are maybe, curious about the faith, or who are just good, kind-hearted people who we work alongside with, our coworkers. We need to, that's a very powerful witness. I was just talking to a young man who's a convert, and he said someone invited him to church because he was desperate and discouraged and depressed, as a very intensely progressive young man. And after church, they invited him to dinner. And he said, I kept going back to church because I wanted to get to that dinner after, because at that dinner, he saw an ordered family that was kind to each other and laughed together and was messy, but shrugged things off and loved each other. And that was so deeply appealing to him and something he hadn't seen before. So I don't think we ever want to, think too smallly about how important that kind of hospitality, mission, and apostolic friendship is. But finally, and most importantly, of course, it's a spiritual battle. It is deeply a spiritual battle. And the more I see about the movement, the more I understand that it really is attacking the faith and seeking to attack God. So, our efforts will mean nothing if they are not first and foremost coming from the Holy Spirit. So we need to be drawing ourselves very closely to Him, asking Him to guide us, to guide our words, to guide our friendships, to guide our actions, to tell us how we can both best be effective in spreading the kingdom of God, and using Him as our guide and prudence as well. So I gave you a lot, but I hope that seems helpful.
Well, that's beautiful and so true. Joy always trumps bitterness, anger. Are you going to be attracted by the bitter, angry activist, or by a joyful heart? Who do you want to aspire to be in that situation? So you're right. Starting at the person, that's how you transform the family, and then obviously it all starts with faith in God, and and that's why this movement is so anti-Christian, because you got to get rid of that element in order to win souls and hearts. But joy trumps that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, one of the things I think I talk about in the book is how, once you understand your real identity, so much talk about identity. Our real identity is not any politicized identity. Our identity is made in the image of God. We're defined by love Himself, and so that gives us this mission to go out and spread the good news, and that's a happy, good news, as you said. Who are you going to be attracted to, the person with the good news or the person with the terrible news? And the good news is compelling, not just because it's good, but because it's true and because I think it resonates with something deep in the human person. And the woke mission is not to spread the good news to people that they are loved, but rather to spread the terrible news that they are defined by hatred and oppression. And that might be appealing to someone who's in a lot of pain, but we've got a better message for people who are suffering and who are in pain, that there's redemption, that there is mercy, that there is love. And that's compelling all on its own as well, and kind of can't be competed with. And so I think, in order to convey that deeply, I think we have to be, understanding how deeply we need it. We need God's mercy. We need forgiveness. We need love. And once we understand that, then we are more merciful to other people. We communicate that sense of mercy. And so, the worst thing we could do is to go out and become a mirror image of the ideology itself, where we reduce someone who disagrees with us down to the ideology instead of seeing them so differently, seeing them as, made in the image of God with that dignity. And so, I think that we defeat it by maintaining that sort of understanding that I have the truth, truth to the degree that I have it, but it has not originated in me. It's a gift. God has, allowed us, to have sort of enough truth to come to him, to come to the faith. And so if it's a gift and not something I merited, or originated within me, then I have a duty to spread it and to be humble in the way that I spread it, to have that sort of humility that I think kind of cannot be mimicked in the ideology. Humility, I think is really hard to, and really off-putting when it's performed. But insofar as we have it deeply in our soul, I think that can really persuade and compel a lot of people to start to question, the reality and goodness of God. And, we can reflect him more deeply insofar as we are drawn more closely to him.
Amen.
Amen. That is beautiful. And you see the stark contrast, at the abortion clinic where you've got these screaming pro-aborts that are disrupting everything, and then you've got the peaceful, prayerful witness on the pro-life side right there. This has been a quick hour, Noelle. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to share with our Faith with Reasons Annunciation Radio audience. The book, again, Awake, Not Woke, A Christian Response to the Cult of Progressive Ideology, and you can get this from Tan Books or order at theologyofhome.com. You could go to Amazon too and get it. Noelle Mering, thank you once again for joining us on Faith with Reasons.
I'm grateful. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Noelle.
And we can keep up with you on the theologyofhome.com website, right?
That's right. You can sign up, and it's free to do so, and we'll stay in touch there.
Thank you.